The red light is on. We are all of us are here today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining Under Review's second episode. And to all of you streaming, listening, watching, hating even, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Today's topic, Under Review, is this year's wide receiver draft class. Who will be there at 27? Who would be a great fit for the Buffalo Bills? And if they don't go that route at 27, who do we like in the mid to late rounds? And before we go into it, I want to welcome both of my guests today, Ryan Sullivan and Bruce Nolan. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
What's up, Joe? Thanks for having me. Well, I know you've been at Cover One for a couple weeks now, but we were talking off air. It's super cool to be on your second show here.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thank you guys again for being here. And I'm really excited to talk about this today. I know I could have went with a million different positions here. There's needs, for a good team like the Bills, it's hard to say this, but there are several needs that need to be addressed. I'm one of those people who actually is part of Aaron Quinn's Protect Josh Allen movement. And I'm a big fan of potentially drafting O-line in the first round. However, I love receivers. I love talking about them, watching them. And I do think there is a need to bring another weapon to the mix here for Josh Allen to work with, for Ken Dorsey to scheme in. So that's why I wanted to focus on this more today and see where we could go with the discussion. Now, I made a bit of a laundry list of names here. So for that, I do apologize to you guys because I put you in the blender a little bit with that. But I figured we'll start out by just asking this question, which is, of these people, the main names, really, the top prospects receiver-wise in this draft, who do you guys think would be the most realistic option at 27? And Bruce, since you're the special guest today, I want to lead with you here and see, what your take on that is. Who do you think would be there if the Bills stay put at 27?
I think that Jalen Hyatt and Josh Downs are both players that I think are going to be there at 27. I think that as the draft gets closer, I think that you're going to start to see the Zay Flowers discussion heat up to the point where I don't think he's going to be there. And Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston are players that offer that well-rounded enough skill set. Quentin Johnston is one of the rare size receivers in this draft. When you have someone who is a specific type, when you go type hunting as a team, you don't have a lot to pick from when this draft class when it comes to size. So I do think Quentin Johnston probably won't be there as well. And listen, I'd love Jordan Addison to be at 27, but I just don't see it. I've seen way too many mocks where he's there at 27. And don't get me wrong, I'm running the card up, but when you're getting some of the comps with some of the production that Jordan Addison has gotten, there's just not enough holes to poke in the game where he ends up being there at 27. You think about first round picks at wide receivers, they are people with either an unbelievably exceptional singular trait, or they are people who just don't have a lot of holes to poke in their game, right? And so when you start to look at the players who are going to be there at 27, you go, okay, I don't think those players, those Quentin Johnston players, are going to be there. And Roy Collins in the comment section says, I think right now Downs at 27 might be an overdraft. I don't think you're wrong. I think Downs at 27 probably is an overdraft. I think Jalen Hyatt at 27 is an overdraft. But those are probably the players who are going to be there. I think that the chances of the Bills taking O-line in round one are high. And I think that they're high mostly because I don't think the wide receivers are going to be there who would scream value.
Can I ask you guys a question? I got this question on. I was listening to. I'm totally stealing the question from. It was a show on Athletic Football Show with Andy Staples, Dane Brugler, Lance Erline, really great guys at what they do, and they were talking about how edge rusher has kind of gotten delineated. Right, we no longer really call if you're a pass rusher, even if you're 3-4 stand up outside linebacker. If you're a pass rusher, we just call you an edge now, right? And I really. Do you guys think as time goes on, are we going to delineate, you'll still play the same way, but would we go to draft and evaluate players? Are we going to, when they pick someone, pick 27, are we going to start delineating between slot receiver, boundary receiver? Do you think we're ever going to start seeing that delineation between, because it's such a unique and diverse position and what players are being asked to do and the diversity of players at the position, I feel like is growing more every year, especially because of the way the position's being developed at a younger level nowadays. Do you guys think we're ever going to see that delineation between, outside receiver, slot receiver, whatever?
I think so. And I think that's just because when you talk about like the modern receiver and you see some of these guys coming out of college, there's a lot more of a hybrid kind of role they play. So a lot of the guys on this list, for example, were lining up at the slot, but you could also see them as a vertical threat. Jalen Hyatt is probably one of my favorite examples of that. I think when you're talking about who you want to draft, you do need to look at, how your offense, and goes without saying, how your offense functions, how they value that type of receiver. So I think when you're kind of taking the deeper look at all of the people in this class, sure, you could take someone who has the traits to be a boundary guy purely, but if you think this guy has the capability of being a slot receiver, bring him in. But also, I think if this guy was a slot receiver in college and that's what you need, view him as a slot receiver and bring him on as a slot receiver. And then if that determines your value at that position, that should be addressed too. We were talking about that Josh Downs comment earlier. Yeah, I think it might be a little bit of a reach because Josh Downs isn't really a hybrid guy, in my opinion. I think he's more of a pure slot guy. And if he's delegated to that one role in this offense, when you have that first round pick, that's your crucial money pick for your future. Do you want to get it so hyper-focused for one type of player, or do you want to delegate that to someone who can be versatile? So that's my take on it.
I think that if we were going to start delineating between boundary receivers and slot receivers, we would already be doing that with corners. When you draft a corner, they say you drafted a corner. They don't say you drafted a nickel guy. So I think that intrinsically we'll know it, right? We'll know it when they draft him. Okay, that's a slot guy. And there'll be one of the questions that almost immediately is asked of a player. Like, for example, when you draft somebody and the tag is offensive lineman, and then you go to the podium, they go, is he a tackle or a guard, right? That's what they did with Cody Ford, right? First thing you said was, hey, it was announced as a tackle. You think he's a tackle? And we said, yeah, he's a tackle. Well, he's wrong. He was a guard. Cody Ford was a guard. And I was pounding the table the whole time that Cody Ford was a guard, and I got a lot of hate for that because I disagreed with the evaluation. But the fact is that I think that we just kind of know, and it comes out real fast, the distinction between slot and otherwise, because it's almost one of the first questions that gets asked of a general manager and a coach right after the draft pick is made is, how do you view this guy? What do you view him as? And then inevitably they'll start rattling off the things that they saw, the things their position coaches saw in this player that made them feel like X, Y, and Z were appropriate roles for them to fill. So whether that's tackle or guard, whether that's boundary corner or slot corner, Amik Robertson was a very popular Bruce discussion a couple years back. And I had this whole thing where, hey, just because you're shorter doesn't mean you're a slot guy. And so the exact same thing would happen when you drafted a guy like Josh Downs. The second you drafted him, the immediate question was, how do you see him used? And they would go, yeah, well, we see him in the slot. We need to get better there. I think you play a little bit with him outside. You can always tell from the vernacular of the general manager, the coaches, the role that they are anticipating for that player after they took him, which is why I don't think you'll see the delineation, because I don't think you really need it. I think that's just going to come out as part of the narrative.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And again, it's telling because I as people who view these prospects coming up in every draft, we want that delineation because we want to see, if this kid is destined to be a guard in the NFL, if he's destined to be a tackle, we want specifics. That's what we desire. But also, you might not need it if this person could play everywhere. Because then, if we're talking about someone like Addison, who could be a hybrid Swiss Army receiver, goes everywhere, then why need to, pinpoint him to one thing? I think it's good as a general thing because you'll know like you said, Bruce, you'll know the intentions after the GM talks about it. And that's really what you want to hear, because we could make all the speculation in the world going into it, but it's not going to matter if this organization views any of these receivers in a way that they see fit. We have no control. So I think just, even though we have edge rusher and then we have the middle of the line and different types of tackles and different stances, when it comes to receiver, it really, unless it's so cut and dry how they played and how they're viewed, like Josh Downs, again, being mostly a slot guy, that I think it's good to just keep it as receiver, and then you'll know the intention afterward. So I agree with that point. And moving on, I think it's time to start talking about our specific receivers here. And I want to bring up one of the comments that actually just came up, because our first person that we are going to talk about is someone that I don't think is going to be there at 27 at all. But I wanted to mention his name because the idea of trading up, while I haven't seen it mentioned, should be discussed, especially for someone of his talent. And that receiver is Quentin Johnston. So first receiver here from TCU, going to be 22 at kickoff. And guys, the ages I listed on here, by the way, that's kickoff age. I figured just show what they're going to be when the season starts. He's definitely the biggest physical freak of this draft. He lined up mostly on the outside boundary of 577 of his 688 snaps, finished with 1,067 yards, 61.8% of his catches were made, which I think is awesome for an outside guy. So why don't you guys start off by just telling me what you like about Quentin Johnston, and even though it might seem like a pipe dream, what you think the Bills would do with him should they end up picking him at some point in this draft?
I mean, he's an electric playmaker. I think he's, you take away some of the drops that he had during the season. I think you probably get a guy who's a clear-cut number one over Addison. It's one of those, you can't teach size, and to have speed at that size is really impressive. I think you can probably be more diverse with where you line him up. And that TCU offense was fun. The way I'm not a, football guy by trade. I stopped playing football. So my assessment I kind of like to do is after I read and watch him is how fun is he to watch? And he's a guy who is super, super fun to watch. And I just want to touch on the comment about trading up for a guy like JSN or Flowers or something like that. Back when I had my old show over at Fanatics, me and Bruce actually had a conversation similar to this, that, people want that one move to push all your chips in to the table and go go all in for the Super Bowl. Signing Von Miller was almost that kind of move for the Bills. And Bruce brought up the point, and I agreed with him back. It was almost 2 years ago now, that it is a lot smarter to build to be longer for better for a longer time than it is to push all your chips into the table for 1 year. Because we look what happened this year. We made that Von Miller move. We lose Von Miller. We lose, significant time from our two safeties who hadn't missed time in 5 years. There's so much variability that can happen over the course of a playoffs, over the course of a year. This isn't a 7-game series system or 5-game series, whatever it is, where the best team is always going to be the one that wins, like Cincinnati going to the Super Bowl last year. Unless you start getting into, a guy like JSN in the 20s, and every year I'll put out a little math chart using the draft value grades, but what it would take to move up. But I would have significant concerns about moving up significantly and getting rid of future draft assets when Josh Allen's going to start making $45 million a year, whatever his cap hit's about to be, because you're going to want those cheap assets. And I know we're frustrated with how the drafts have gone of late, but you're going to want those down the road as Josh Allen gets more and more expensive. So I will never be a huge trade up, at least not significant trade up guy like I think some people might want.
I'm with him. I'm obviously with him. He referenced my comments from a couple of years ago. Be as good as you can for as long as you can and hope you get lucky. And there is a time to trade up. And I think it's around cornerstone pieces, specifically trading up for a quarterback, right? I'm completely on board with trading up for a quarterback. Always. If you have a guy, go get your guy. Go do it. As far as trading up at this section, at this moment in the team building section, I'm not a fan. Now you want to trade up, 2 spots and grab Kyer Elam for a 4th, go right ahead, go ahead and do that. But for me, trading up for a receiver is just limiting your chances of getting it right. Now, Quentin Johnston is a very unique prospect in this class because 6'4" people don't move like Quentin Johnston moves, right? You don't see 6'4" receivers get a lot of bubble screens and go, hey, just go make somebody miss. What do you mean go make somebody miss? I'm 6'4". Like it's just a very strange phenomenon, but he has extremely loose hips for being that big. The movement ability of Quentin Johnston is special. Now, there are other things, specifically with his catching technique, that we don't like, and you hope if you get him paired with a good wide receiver coach and a good offensive system, you can work that stuff out. But there are things you simply cannot teach with Quentin Johnston. I understand why people would be enamored by him. I totally get it. And there isn't another Quentin Johnston in this class. It's not like 6'3", 6'4" receivers are falling out of the tree in this class. This is a very small class. So that really has a tendency to push players like Quentin Johnston up the board because there are people out there who are not looking for a receiver. They're looking for a tall receiver, right? We all remember the James Hardy draft where everyone was like, oh, we need a receiver. We need a tall receiver. Oh, don't hit me with that Deshaun Jackson nonsense. I want a tall receiver. And then you went out and got him. You got James Hardy.
I have a James Hardy jersey. Fun fact. That was my first ever Bills jersey, with a James Hardy jersey after he was drafted.
There you go. Look at this. Look at all the community we're bringing together under the James Hardy thing. So things like that have a tendency to get players pushed up the board just from a supply and demand standpoint. The draft is much more about economics than we would like to admit it is. It just is. Economics, supply and demand, all these concepts still ring true, even when you're dealing with assets that are human beings instead of assets that are monetary. So Quentin Johnston, there isn't another 6'4" player in the draft that moves like that. So because of that, I have a very hard time imagining he's going to be there at 27. And my appetite for trading up significantly for a receiver is pretty low. One of the comments in the comment section was, if they trade Oliver and get a day 2 pick for him, could you see them trading up in round 2 for a wide receiver? Well, if you trade Oliver and you get a day 2 pick for him, you just created a 3-tech hole. So I don't want to create a hole and then use the asset that I got when I created the hole to then fill a different hole. Now I'm filling the 3-tech hole with a different lower asset because I used the asset I got back to fill another. See, I'm moving shells around at this point. So I'm with John in the comment section. I'm much more in favor of trading down this year than I am trading up. Now, most of that is because I think that there's going to be value in the top of the second round for wide receivers and offensive linemen, which are the two biggest needs for the Buffalo Bills by a lot of measures. So I think I am much, much more in favor of trading down. Now, I don't think Brandon Beane's going to do it, right? Trading down from a high pick is not something Brandon Beane really does. He traded down a couple times last year in the second, but I think it was just because he didn't really have a lot of people he really loved there, and they eventually drafted James Cook. It was almost like James Cook was if we get him, we don't. But they weren't overly excited about James Cook. It's not like they stood pat and were like, oh, we got to have James Cook. They traded down twice, right? And then they got James Cook, and they're like, he's here, So for me, I much more rather, fill the space in the value proposition by trading down versus then create space in the value proposition by trading up.
Completely agree with both points. And yeah, Bruce, I listened to one of your recent episodes, and I remember you saying in it that, when you go all in, you go all in. Your actions have consequences. You look at the grandeur of making that move, but then you pay the price, the following year or very soon. When it comes to trading up, you are paying the price. You are indeed going to, you could get the shiny wide receiver prospect, but again, that's a prospect. And you don't know how that'll pan out versus now we just gave up assets for this guy and we filled holes, or we made holes on our roster that we now need to fill by using draft capital we didn't have to use originally, which is why when it came to the Ed Oliver sentiment too, I talked to the Bills guys about this too in our Cover One chat. Yeah, you could trade out Oliver, but then you're making another hole in a position where there's already holes. I mean, the depth behind Daquan Jones, even Ed, wasn't that great, and especially injury ridden. So why would you really make that choice unless it's a lucrative enough deal where you feel like the capital you're getting back is enough to still be like, we can make this hole, but we'll plug it up and get more. So that's a situation where I could see that happening. I want to move on to another receiver, another polarizing one that, maybe a few weeks ago or even a month ago when he was first brought up, I felt like he would be end of first round. I don't think that anymore, especially how he might dominate the combine today. Zay Flowers. And it stinks because I love this kid. You talk about being a big body. This guy's not big, but he plays big and he's fast and he's a vertical threat. Most of his snaps came out wide, finished 62.9 of his passes, finished, caught, and then 1,077 yards. He was a force. And when you watch him, he pops off the tape. I mean, that specific catch where he caught in double coverage, was it against Syracuse? I'm trying to remember what team he was playing. But he lights up the field when he's on, and you could put him anywhere. I thought he'd be there. I don't think he'll be there now. What do you guys think?
I don't think he'll be there. I think that finding a player who plays predominantly on the outside, who can win on 3 different levels of the field, is just rare enough that from an economic standpoint, he's just not going to make it to 27. Someone is going to look at Zay Flowers and think that's Antonio Brown. Like that's what they're going to do. And so they're going to talk themselves into a size outlier, which is what Zay Flowers is. Zay Flowers is a size outlier, right? He is small. He put on 13 pounds for the combine. I don't know how I feel about putting on that weight. We're all doing it. It's hilarious. We're all looking at Bryce Young's 204-pound measurement and going, come on, man. You just had a really big burrito. But then when Zay Flowers does it, we're like, look, he can carry 183 pounds. He's fine. Like the dude plays in the low 170s. Like there is a very reasonable chance that before a game in November, Zay Flowers was 169 pounds. Like he is a size outlier. So some team is going to talk themselves into that. I don't know. I mean, the Bills had an opportunity to trade down in 2013, and they did it because someone wanted to come up and get a specific player who was a size outlier wide receiver who they thought could turn into an offensive weapon. Does anybody remember who that was?
Oh, God. Who did they trade down with? I don't even remember.
The Los Angeles Rams. At the time, it wasn't Los Angeles Rams, but
was that
Rams.
Cooks? Was that Cooks?
No, that was not Cooks, but they traded up and they traded down and got EJ Manuel, which of course was a huge red flag because you traded down and took a quarterback. It was Tavon Austin.
Oh, Bills legend Tavon Austin.
Legend Tavon Austin, right? 5'8", 185, right? Zay Flowers is about an inch taller than that, but he's about 15 pounds lighter than that. He is a size outlier for sure. And there's going to be a team who's going to talk themselves into that because, again, he plays out wide. He's got a good release package. He played in a major conference. He can win at all three levels of the field. They're going to say, yeah, I'm good with that. And you know what? That's okay. There are outliers who win. And so for me, when I look at Zay Flowers, I think to myself, okay, if this guy was 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier, he's probably the first wide receiver off the board in the top 10. Like, that's just the way it is. But you have to say, okay, outliers exist. Josh Allen's an outlier. Like we're the team that's quarterbacked by the outlier. We can't just say how they don't exist. They do exist, right? He's Josh Allen, the improbable. We know outliers exist, but do you want to bank on it is the question. Do you want to bank on it at the wide receiver position? Because I can see a future where Zay Flowers is Antonio Brown without potentially the head case issues. Like I can see a future where he's really, really, really good. And I can also see lots of futures where that size just becomes a significant issue because there's a reason why you don't have significant receivers in the NFL that are that size. Like there's a reason why you're looking at players and going, oh, Antonio Brown, Deontay Johnson. Yeah, they were day 3 picks. Like you're talking about players that were day 3 picks because everyone knew how unlikely it was that they would be successful in the NFL due to their size. Like that was part of the reason they were day 3 picks, but you're not talking about a day 3 pick. You're talking about a mid first round pick. And I think Flowers is going to be that.
I want to interject really fast, Ryan, before you go. When you're talking about the size and the risk of the size with him, I think it's a different spot for the Bills than it would be for a team that truly needs that wide receiver one. And I like to use Devontae Smith as the example here because you look at the Eagles after they traded for A.J. Brown. Obviously, when Smith first got there, he was their one. Now I would consider him probably either a 1B or a 2. But when you are already in the luxury of having someone like Stephon Diggs and Dawson Knox and options in your receiving core, I think that does give you the leeway to take the risk on someone with more questionable size, just because you already have these other roles filled and defenses are already having their hands full with these offensive weapons you have. So you do get the luxury of that. But if you're talking about a team that needs a receiver desperately, you could even call, the Patriots here to this because outside of Jacoby Myers, who's now probably leaving, there's not really much there. That's where you have to get it right. So I think in this circumstance for the Bills, if Zay somehow is in their lap, if they somehow move up, down, whatever for him, I'm not opposed to the rolling the dice of it just for the Bills because they're a good team and they can afford to take the chance on this guy's size. And if it pans out, it's even better. So just wanted to interject with that real fast.
I will say it's really funny that you brought up Tavon Austin to the Rams because then 2 years ago they drafted Tutu Atwell, who was also incredibly small with their second round pick, and he hasn't panned out either. But I'm kind of in Bruce's boat too, that I've fallen in love with guys that skinny, but it seems like this whole draft is guys that are just, Bruce said it, they're all super, like you look and it's all $180, $170, $190. Like there's no 6'3", 220 guys or whatever, there's no big ball, Cedric Tillman's bigger, but even he's not a massive guy by, Gabe Davis standards, maybe, you know what I mean? There's no real thick guys in the draft. Bills guys talk about it a lot. Judge talks about it a lot, alpha slots, not a lot of, guys that are big ball winners in this draft. But I do wonder, do you think, Bruce, you talked about, ability to stay healthy at that size, even between now and 2013, do you think the game has changed enough in terms of protecting wide receivers and, ball carriers in general that it is easier to stay healthy at lighter sizes or smaller sizes, I should say?
I do. My concern with size when it comes to those receivers is not primarily related to health. It's primarily related to not being able to deal with physicality in your routes, because even the best route runners in the world still going to get touched, right? That's just the way it is. So, we have all these wonderful Senior Bowl clips of people absolutely dusting cornerbacks. I feel terrible for cornerbacks at the Senior Bowl. I feel awful. They're in absolute no-win situations. There's basically no help at all anywhere on the entire field. They have the entire field to run away from you, and they have two-way goes every single snap. It's just a disaster for a corner. My heart goes out to them. But you see these people absolutely dusting them. That's not the way it works in real life. It's a lot more compressed. It's a lot more physical. And there are situations where you have players who just can't deal with physicality in their routes, right? Once they encounter physicality in their route, they just get stuck. And when you have smaller receivers, you also need to understand that it's not just about the height and the weight, it's about the length. And so you have increased your margin for error when you are longer because your catch radius increases. So length matters from a wide receiver standpoint, not just from the ability to get off press, but also because catch radius matters. And if you have quarterbacks like Josh Allen, who are 100% zip code accurate, right? But Josh Allen's never been known as the ultimate precision passer in the world. These are players like Cole Beasley who present themselves open to the quarterback and say, okay, hit me, right? And if you want someone to be Cole Beasley, that's awesome. But I wouldn't draft Cole Beasley in the first round, would you? Like, would anyone draft the peak Cole Beasley, right? You have the best Buffalo Bills version of Cole Beasley, because I think Cole Beasley was at his best in Buffalo. Yeah. I wouldn't spend a first-round pick on that. I wouldn't probably spend a high second-round pick on that. So, yes, those things have value, but if that's all they are, then that value is diminished, which is where you go back to that whole day 3 discussion we were talking about with Deontay and with Antonio Brown, where, yeah, they outperformed that spot, but the reason you picked them there is because you didn't think that ceiling was going to be there, primarily due to their size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with that point. I want to move on just because we got some names on this list from Zay Flowers. We're moving on to Jordan Addison now. And another person that, again, at a time I thought was possible to be there at 27, but I'm not so sure now. But this is probably, of them, my favorite, all over the place. What I really liked about him, and it's something that I could foresee the Bills using him for should they somehow get him, is he's a menace in the screen game. And I know that they've had those plays in the past, in the Dable era, not as much in the Dorsey era, it didn't seem to work, where they were having Diggs line up, take a screen, take it down. They did it with John Brown too. He would be perfect for that role. Obviously, you can put him anywhere else. This is a microcosm of his game, but mainly a wideout, 74.6% completion rate, which is awesome. I really want to hear your guys' opinion on him. I don't think it's outlandish to say he'd be there at 27, but maybe it is. What do you think?
I do want to say my biggest takeaway from watching Jordan Addison, God, I can never speak when I'm on podcast. Jordan Addison is that Caleb Williams is really good. I was watching. I was watching it. It was distracted. I'm like, oh my God. But again, a guy who's a little bit slender, but I like guy, with the transfer portal the way it is now, I think we're going to get a really interesting insight into how quickly guys can learn new offenses and how malleable they are to new offenses and how flexible they are. Because it's tough, especially at that. The offenses are complex. Even in college, it's hard stuff to learn, and to go from Pitt to USC and still being successful. I know he had a little bit step down this year in terms of numbers, but still really good receiver. I like guys who've won awards in college. He's a Blitikoff Award winner, or at least a runner-up. I think winner. I think he won it in Pitt. I really like guys like that. And, we talk about, I think one of the things I like about this wide receiver class, we keep talking about who's going to fall, who's going to be there at 27. I think one of the things that helps Buffalo in terms of, maybe a guy falling to them is, last year, there was, you had now Olave and Wilson, but they were all gone before Buffalo because you only had one quarterback taken before the Bills. And now, I started just kind of going through numbers, guys that you can lock in to go before Buffalo. There's probably going to be 4 quarterbacks that go before Buffalo. You think there's going to be at least 2 offense, in my count, 2 offensive linemen that are at least going to go before Buffalo, Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski. You think about guys, defensive players that'll go before Buffalo. I'm assuming Carter because the NFL, I think they're going to overlook the stuff going on. Carter, Anderson, Wilson, and the guy from Clemson's guy escaping my name now. I think they all go before. So I think this
Miles
is
Murphy.
Miles Murphy, thank you. I think they're gonna all end up, I think there's 12, I was just trying to count guys who I think are definite locks to go before Buffalo. And I think you get the 12, 13 guys who are definite locks to get before Buffalo. So I do think, as opposed to last year where we were hoping for some of these guys to fall who ended up didn't, there is a chance that, maybe a guy looks at Jordan Anderson, another guy who's a little bit smaller, and they fall. But I think he's a guy who's going to end up going first just because I think he's got the less loot, doesn't have the drop issues that, maybe a guy like Quentin Johnston has. I think he's a little bit more refined than some of the other guys are. But, I think he's the guy who comes in, we like to use the term NFL ready. I think he's in the first round, at least. I think he's my most NFL ready wide receiver.
I agree with that 100%. I agree with the label of NFL ready. I agree with the fact that you have, the reason why I think that Zay Flowers and Addison should be the first 2 receivers off the board is for exactly that reason, right? They have the least amount of concerns about them. And so when I mentioned earlier about first round picks and specifically first round receivers, I say you have to be someone who doesn't have a lot of holes in your game or someone who has one exceptional trait, right? What did I just describe? I just described Addison. There's not a lot of holes in the game, right? Yeah, you wish he was a little bit bigger, but he's not a size outlier. There are plenty of receivers who have been his size who have succeeded in the NFL. And as we have started to see the death of that dominant size X receiver, like there's just not that many of those people in the NFL. If you look at some of the top receivers in the NFL, a lot of them are between 5'11" and 6'1", 6'2". Like it's not, you don't have these 6'4" towers like you did before. I mean, the year that Mike Evans came out, it was like, oh man, we got Mike Evans and Kelvin Benjamin. You got all these really big receivers. And that's not really a thing anymore in the NFL, right? Mike Evans is a dying breed because the game is based on the idea that you don't want to have to make contested catches. I think that contested catches are not viewed the same way that they have been. Previously, it was, oh man, contested catches is just such a safety blanket, right? Just throw it up to him, right? He'll make it happen. And we all like, well, hold on. What if you don't have to be contested? Isn't that better? Like we're all thinking as an NFL community, like, is contested better? I think contested's worse. Like, wouldn't you want someone who doesn't have contested catches? So, and that of course lends then into quarterback play where that arm strength becomes more and more important because you can be able to see it open, throw it open. So all this stuff is connected in the way that offenses are running and the way we evaluate wide receivers. And Jordan Addison just doesn't have enough flaws in his game that I think he'll be there at 27 because someone's going to look at him and go, yeah, it's a little bit like buying a house. When you walk into a house and you're buying a house, they always tell you that you're supposed to envision yourself in that house, right? Envision yourself living in this house, envision your furniture in this house, envision your day-to-day life in this house. That's the way it is when you go shopping for a prospect. Envision that guy in your offense. And it's so easy to envision Jordan Addison in an offense. Any offense goes, yeah, I can do all sorts of things with Jordan Addison. Any offensive coordinator goes, yeah, absolutely, we can make that work. And players like that just don't make it to 27.
Yeah, he does seem like the most NFL ready, which is why he's my favorite. Again, the projections have been all over the place for a lot of these guys when it first came out. That's any offseason, but I originally thought it was likely, but now I'm starting to really trend the other way. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's a pipe dream for me because imagine just this guy that can go anywhere, a Swiss Army man, winding up across Diggs or next to Diggs, and you just have to account for him in the same offense. It would be so much fun to watch. Likelihood, probably not much, but when it comes to NFL ready, I think he is the most NFL ready in this class, and whoever takes him, he's going to be a day one contributor, definitely. Our next one, this is an interesting one because when I pulled his stats, I had to pull from the year prior because he got hurt this year, and I'm wondering if that injury, even though it was a hamstring injury, it wasn't like an ACL, it wasn't anything too gnarly, but it did, limit him. and it's going to come up at the combine and going to be a point of emphasis. And that's Jackson Smith-Njigba, Ohio State. He is just under 200 pounds at 6 foot, primarily a slot guy, one of our many slot receivers here. But as sure-handed as it gets, this dude is as reliable as it comes, and I think would be a great security blanket for Josh Allen should he be there. Accrued almost 1,600 yards in 2021. Almost 85% of his catches, caught. I can't talk. 85% of his passes. It is just someone who I could absolutely envision being a reliable target in this offense. And I might be optimistic here, but I think he could be there at 27. I think it's within realm. So do you think so? Or are we thinking he'll be gone as well?
Bruce is the Ohio State guy. I'll let him take this one.
If Jackson Smith-Njigba falls, I'm running. I'm screaming at the television. And this is my, you said that you had your pie in the sky of Jordan Addison. My pie in the sky is Jackson Smith-Njigba concerns enough people that he falls. And that ends up Quentin Johnston goes ahead, Zay Flowers goes ahead, and everyone goes, well, we don't know if he's a slot only. You know why? Because Justin Jefferson had a lot of the same questions. Oh, he's a slot only guy. He makes it to the 20s and things like that. So for me, if Jackson Smith-Njigba is there at 27, I'm screaming at the television. Just screaming at the television. Because he's exactly what the Buffalo Bills need him to be. If you are of the opinion that the Buffalo Bills should draft a slot player and keep Gabe Davis on the outside, and the slot player can essentially become your de facto number 2, right? Your number 2 in the pecking order, number 2 in the target structure, but not necessarily an outside boundary player. I think when we think about number 2s, we have a tendency to think that means the other outside player, and that's not the case at all. Oh, he's a number 2. Okay. What does that mean? I don't like when we throw things like that because there's plenty of number 1s who are slot players. Right? Cooper Kupp's a slot player. He's a number 1. Right? Amon-Ra St. Brown is a number 1. He's a slot player. So I think you can have these players. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, just so you know, is a fairly significant comp to Jackson Smith-Njigba that pops around quite a bit, which is interesting because Jackson Smith-Njigba was probably a first-round pick and Amon-Ra St. Brown was a day 3 guy. Now, I loved Amon-Ra St. Brown. I was a huge fan of him coming out, but I didn't think he was a first-round pick. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is better. And I think that his route running is better. I think that the pacing, the understanding of leverage, I think spatial awareness is such a big factor in the slot where you have to be able to do geometry while running full speed, right? That is essentially what playing slot is like. And I think that the idea that you can be behind a defender and know the direction they're drifting and make sure that you present yourself open in the opposite direction to a quarterback, I think it's so much between the ears that you don't see it. The Jackson Smith-Njigba, sometimes when you ask yourself a question, like, how is he always open? Like you go, like Travis Kelce, right? You ask all the time, you're like, how is he always open? I don't understand. It's partly Andy Reid, and it's partly he just understands where everybody is on the field. And Jackson Smith-Njigba has those things. You think, oh, well, he wasn't even the best receiver on his own team. The fact that he was able to shine at all with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave is spectacular. We're saying this like the 2 people who were playing ahead of him were garbage. We're saying like, oh, well, Joe Flacco had to transfer to Delaware because he couldn't beat out somebody, crazy. No, that's not the situation that this is. This is a entirely different situation. If Jackson Smith-Njigba is there at 27, you freaking take him. That's what happens. And so if you think that you need a slot player, then you take Jackson Smith-Njigba. If you think you need an outside player, you still take Jackson Smith-Njigba because he's that good. If you think you need someone who has the release package, which I think he can develop, this is important. It's not there right now, but Brian Hartline is the best wide receivers coach in the country. It's not
unreal.
Close.
It's unreal.
He is the best wide receivers coach in football. And we knew it when he was coming out because Brian Hartline was one of those people who did all the little things correct as a receiver. He just didn't have the physical gifts. So it makes complete sense that he would be taking all those little things that he did right and transferring them onto wide receivers at Ohio State, which is absolutely wide receiver U at this point. Mm-hmm. Ohio State is wide receiver U. So for me, absolutely. I don't care if he runs a 4.6. I really don't. I just don't care. He is a really, really good player who, regardless of what you think ails the Bills' passing attack, will be able to help you fix.
Running a 4.6 doesn't mean you can't get yourself open, especially if you're a slot guy with great footwork, or even just being able to get open on the outside. But yeah, I agree with all those points. If he's there at 27, I'm pounding the table. Again, like I've been a primary, like my whole approach to this topic in general was just who do I think would be there for the Bills that would be an immediate target where it bolsters the offense. And this is probably one of the best options you can have. And I do think there's some realism to it. Want to say that better sense of judgment if he's there, but also like Osiris Torrence is there. I can't say who they'd actually pick in that situation, but I want to protect Allen, but man, it'd be hard to pass up on him. Another person who would be hard to pass up on if he does happen to fall, and we're going to get into some guys that now are kind of a little bit later on, maybe second round, and this is one of my favorites in this draft, Mr. Josh Downs. We had a couple great hashtags in our chat yesterday. Downs with the sickness, was one of them. I like that one. But this is your security blanket. I mean, I watched him. He's smooth as butter. His footwork's amazing. But when he gets the ball in his hands, his acceleration is awesome. Just next level stuff. And I think he'll be there in the second round. But I also think you never know when a team's going to try and poach him. And that's kind of my concern about if he falls to us or not. And I don't know if he will. And I really don't want to give up on him. So the consensus opinion on Josh Downs, what do you guys think?
I like Josh Downs. This is kind of the take I was workshopping through here. If we get to a position, let's say, in a world where the Bills trade down, they still probably won't happen. But if we're coming down, and I think two guys who are kind of in the same zip code in terms of grades, from everything that I've seen, are him and Jalen Hyatt. And I like Josh Downs. I think the Bills could use a slot receiver. But if I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the board, and Josh Downs, who might not be as polished as a slot receiver as JSN, I like Jalen Hyatt a little bit better than that because I think he brings something super unique. I think the Bills, I think I really like what I saw in Khalil Shakir this year in terms of taking over the slot next year, even though it was super limited, and it seemed like the Bills didn't want to trust him right away, which I don't totally understand. But I think if I'm looking at a board with Josh Downs and Jalen Hyatt, I'm a little bit lower on Josh Downs for the Bills specifically because I think after JSN, who I think is a super unique talent, I'd rather get someone who has super top end speed. And that's not a knock on Josh Downs. I think, like you guys said, I think this was an offense the Bills offense was an offense that really struggled giving Josh easy options down the stretch, which is why they brought back Cole Beasley. And, it became a real maddening point down the stretch when we were throwing four verts. It seemed like, every third and short, towards the end of the season. And I think Josh Downs is good. I think, I think guy who has a really good feel for game. Another guy who I watch and I'm like, man, Drake May's pretty good too.
Yeah.
It's gonna be next year's quarterback discussion. I think is gonna be really fun. I think it's gonna be the first, May and Williams. I think is gonna be a really fun storyline next year. But I like Josh Downs a lot. I have Hyatt over him if it can, in a hypothetical situation where we're picking one over the other. He's but I'm never gonna turn down. Another guy, Bruce talked about it. Ability to get open is super important, and separation is super important. And any guy who's going to give Josh easy answers is super important.
I think that one of the things that you don't expect from Josh Downs is how big he plays. You don't expect him to be this good when he can't uncover. Like, you expect him to uncover because that's what he does. He plays in the slot. Like you said, the footwork is immaculate from Josh Downs, and it's immaculate through the route. We talk about footwork a lot in release package, and we talk about footwork a lot at the break. But that's not all there is to footwork. There's pacing in routes. You can draw a line on a whiteboard, like just draw a straight line, right? And it doesn't look like that if a really good route runner runs it, right? There's pacing, there's lean, there's bend, there's hip flexation, there's ankle flexation. It's not as simple as just, I'm going to run in a straight line. And so it might look like a line on a playbook, and it might look like a line on the whiteboard, but that's not a line. And Josh Downs consistently makes the right decisions with balance, with lean, with eyes, things you don't see often. And so I think Downs is probably the best pure slot guy in the book. I think that he has all the same things I loved about a certain Penn State Nittany Lion last year without the experience on the outside. I was pretty on board. I was pretty on board with the receiver class last year. I was a big fan of a lot of the receivers last year. This one's better, I think. This class in general is better. But I also think if you like slot guys, if you want a slot guy, you can have a lot of different flavors of slot guy. But Josh Downs is the best pure one. I mean, I made the Jahan Dotson comment just now, but Jahan Dotson was an outside guy. I think that, but all those same traits, the idea that he's a smaller guy, but he plays like a bigger guy, all that stuff is the same thing with Downs. And so for me, I like him better than Jalen Hyatt. I think Jalen Hyatt is a very, 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 very specialized player, right? Jalen Hyatt is, we going to protect him and we're going to have him run really fast. Like that's Jalen Hyatt, right? You keep him off the line of scrimmage and you have him get into open up his hips and run. And there's not a lot of nuance to Jalen Hyatt's route running. I like the hands for sure. And I like the size and I love the speed, but he was extremely protected by Tennessee's system. I made a meme on Twitter. That's how protected he was, of a guy shielding another guy. And it says the guy doing the shielding says Tennessee offense, and the guy being shielded says Jalen Hyatt, because they were like, we don't want anyone to touch him until he's 7 yards down the field, because we know that the guy can fly. And he can absolutely fly. I would not be shocked if Jalen Hyatt was a 4.28 guy, a 4.29 guy. That would not shock me at all. I'd be like, yeah, that tracks. But it's a one trick pony. I mean, that's the thing that he does well, but that's the only thing. Like, he just does that thing. And I understand people drafting him in the first round, low in the first round. That's really specialized for a player in the first round. I'd much rather have Downs. I just think he does more things. And Hyatt has a higher ceiling. There's more projection. He's bigger. Obviously, he's got great hands. But as far as the actual nuances of playing receiver, Jalen Hyatt is just go run that direction really fast, and he consistently does it. Awesome. But I don't know how effective that is in the NFL right away. I think you just need work.
Yeah, and I saw for some of the write-ups on Jalen Hyatt, I'm glad you guys segued into it. He wasn't ready, was a lot of people said. It's not to say you can't draft him, but that he's a work in progress. He's a project receiver. But Brandon Beane likes projects. He likes developing people. He likes taking the flyer on the people with athletic ability and might need some time to marinate in a playbook and a certain coaching system before they actually start. You saw it with Rousseau. You saw it with Allen. So it's not outlandish to say that Jalen Hyatt's there. They'll take him. And honestly, when you look at how the Bills offense was constructed since Allen got there and what they put around him, they value speed. That's why they brought in John Brown. That's why they brought back John Brown. They don't want Diggs or Davis to be your only two guys that are on the outside. And I think Hyatt, even though you might line him up in the slot, would be, in my opinion, the most realistic pick that they could do this year. And there's a lot of value to bringing him in because you're adding so much more speed, which I think you got it in Cook a bit, but you're not having Cook run down the field. You'll have Hyatt do it. I think that's a component of the offense that is kind of missing. And I would see them bringing it in and having him be that burner guy, especially when you want to take some of the load off Diggs or even Davis, who we've kind of argued he's not the worst, but not the best at getting separation. So Jalen Hyatt to me would be kind of a pick I would love to have, but I do agree with you that Josh Downs to me is the better slot receiver. And I think that even though you have Shakir's a hybrid guy, I would like the idea of Downs being the permanent slot guy and Shakir getting more lineup on the outside to take some of the slack off of Diggs and Davis. And then another receiver that I want to talk about here, just because Aaron, asked if we were going to mention it, I got to bring him up because he had a great, Senior Bowl and people love him and he was the leading receiver. Mr. Tank Dell. I put Nathaniel. I want to be formal here. I didn't want to just call him Tank. I don't know if he likes being called Tank. Who knows? Yes, he had almost 1,400 yards this past year, 17 touchdowns, and caught 71% of his passes. What's the consensus on Tank Dell? Where do you think he'll be?
I think he's another guy that's so small. Yeah. I felt it's one of those things that it's probably unfair, but I've fallen in love with so many. I was in love I mentioned him earlier, Tutu Atwell coming out 2 years ago, fell in love with him. And he just hasn't been able to do much because he's so small and I don't know what way he's going to weigh in, but he's miniature and, it's tough to see him being able to win the way he did in college, against if someone presses him. If, maybe, like Bruce said with Jalen Hyatt, if you can find a way to protect him, find a way to get him clean releases, maybe he can develop into, he can overcome that. But again, I think, especially so late in the, whether it's day 2 or day 3 for him, he'd be such a size outlier to overcome.
I'm totally with you. I think there's a very reasonable chance that when you draft Tank Dell, you have all the ideas in the world, right? You have a Roscoe Parrish level of idea of what this player is going to look like in your offense. And then they just never get past that. And there's a place for players like Tank Dell. It's on day 3 as a gadget player. It's on day 3 as a player who you think, hey, I can make something work with this player in limited schemed touches in my offense. I don't think you ever going to have a situation where you're driving meaningful parts of your offense through Tank Dell. It's just, think about all the things I talked about with size outlier with Zay Flowers. Okay. Now crank all those things up to 11 because
155 pounds.
So Tank Dell, you get lucky if he's playing in the high 160s. Like, just, there isn't a track to run on, which means if you want to draft Tank Dell on day 2 and say, hey, we're going to make this guy a meaningful part of our offense, right? He's going to be number 2, number 3. We're going to command him at least 50 to 60 targets a year. Okay, cool. You're now going to be the first team ever to pull that off. Like, and if you want to try to say we're arrogant enough as a franchise, we're arrogant enough as an offensive coordinator, arrogant enough as a head coach that I can make something work that nobody else has ever made work. Hey, you know what? Go ahead. But I don't have that level of ego. So I don't have the level of ego going, yeah, well, we can pull it off. No one else ever did, but we can totally pull it off. And so there are always going to be outliers. Like I said, we are a team that is quarterbacked by an outlier. So you don't just pretend they don't exist, but you don't play meaningfully into them either.
Yeah, size was the concern for me. And again, one of the points you made earlier, Bruce, was about how when you're at Senior Bowl and you feel bad for the cornerback because the receiver is all that field, it's going to make people that you might not have evaluated as someone who would be higher up look like they can be at that point, which is like in the mid to late options that I'm going to, talk about soon. These guys are getting a lot of praise, but is it really as much as they just looked really good in a practice or looked really good running in a simulation versus actual game film? And I'm not trying to take away from their ability, but yeah, Tank Dell was the talk of the town after they saw him at practice. And I think he deserves the praise, especially for the numbers he put up this year. But yeah, when you're talking about someone who literally weighs less than me, and I can never get to say that because I've been built 5'10" and not a big dude, when someone weighs less than me, it is telling that there should be some concern about that size. And you're right. If you were worried about someone like Zay Flowers for his size, even though I think he's going to be money, Tank Dell deserves that same worry. But that's why I think he'll fall to some later rounds. But again, when you're a team with the luxury to take a receiver later on and not have it be the most pressing need, because I don't think receiver is number 1 on the list, I do think you can roll the dice on him and just see if it works out. And if it does, then yeah, you look like the smartest people in the room. And Brandon Beane looked like the smartest guy in the room when he took Allen, and he's starting to look pretty smart for taking Rousseau. Again, I talk about projects. Rousseau's panning out pretty well for the team. This is something I could see where they want to take the flyer on him and maybe make it work in the future. And now that we move on to the mid to late round options, obviously we have a lot of names here. I apologize again for forcing Bruce for you to watch, Charlie Jones. That was certainly something I don't think anyone expected. But I want you guys to just tell me, some of your favorite names here. Who do you really like from the mid-late option list that I listed here? Someone you could see being a contributor for the Bills, whether that's down the road or immediately.
I cheated a little bit. I went off your list, and I said I was looking through. I was trying to find someone that I haven't. I'll try to knock off players I haven't looked at yet. And Tyler Scott from Cincinnati, I really, really, really enjoyed watching his game. Kind of we have Jalen Hyatt at home type pick. In terms of a guy who's a former junior Olympian. Again, you're gonna have to was protected a lot in how we got the ball, but unique speed. And when I look at players later in the draft, he's probably gonna be a day 2 guy as opposed to a day 3 guy. But I look at guys later in the draft, and every offseason I say this: give me something that isn't on this team. And I really want to see this offense with someone who can take the top off the offense for them. And you saw what Tyreek Hill has done for the teams that he's been on, and not that speed necessarily being separation, but Tyler Scott from Cincinnati is just a guy who I think is going to have a good combine. And I would love to see someone that has that ability to get deep and I would love to see Allen throw a ball, balls to a guy like that.
You're going to hear a level of enthusiasm from me in the next few minutes that you probably haven't heard frequently. I am a absolutely massive Jayden Reed fan from Michigan State. I do not understand. I just don't get it. I have gone back and watched him so many times because I don't get it. How are we living in a world where Josh Downs is being talked about as a potential late first, early second round pick, and Jayden Reed is talked about like an early day 3 guy? I don't want to live in that world. I don't understand. I don't get it. 50-50 boundary slot, right? Creates early separation, creates speed separation, creates vertical separation, runs all the route tree, gives you kick return, gives you punt return, schemed up touches. I don't understand. What's the problem here? Right? Yes, he's a little bit small, but he's not a size outlier at all. Like, there's plenty of people who are Jayden Reed's size who are good. You know what it is? Jayden Reed's the kind of player who gets drafted by the Steelers on day 3 and ends up being a stud. That's what it is. And it happens every single year, and I'm sick and tired of it. Just be the team who drafts Jayden Reed. I don't understand. Why are we doing this? Someone please tell me why we don't like Jayden Reed. Can someone tell me this? Well, I mean, he's not as good of a route runner as Josh Downs. Sure, I don't have as strong an arm as Josh Allen either. But you know what? If I can still throw the ball 70 yards on a line, by the way, I can't, just so you know, I can't throw the ball 70 yards on a line. But if I still can, yeah, sure, he's not Josh Allen, but a lot of people are not Josh Allen. A lot of people are not Josh Downs when it comes to exceptional levels of route running. But Jayden Reed's really good. You can throw him contested catches, he'll make them. He can create early separation. He can create late separation. He can create vertical separation. What else do you want from him? Someone please tell me why we don't like Jayden Reed. Can anybody, Bueller? Someone tell me. Someone please. I don't understand. I don't get it. I keep going back and going, okay, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to watch Jayden Reed. I'm going to, I've cleared my head, and I'm going to see some sort of glaring flaw that makes him a day 3 pick and not like an early day 2 guy. Yeah. And I'll go and I'll look at it and go, nope, still nothing. I'll walk out of the room. My head's held low. My wife will be like, what's going on, Bruce? I'll be like, I looked for it. I couldn't find it. It's like when you lose your phone and you can't find it. It's me looking for the massive flaw in Jayden Reed that would make people think he's a day 3 guy.
I feel like he's definitely going to be one of those guys that we look back on. That's how I felt about Amon-Ra St. Brown 2 years ago, that I didn't understand how he kept falling and falling. I think he's going to be one of those guys that we look at and he ends up naming all the wide receivers that went before him. Cause I think sometimes, even teams I think are sometimes susceptible to biases based on the teams they played on. Michigan State was not very good this year. I think sometimes that get unfairly, and I think it's an implicit bias, but I think sometimes teams take into account weird stuff like that, even if it's subconsciously. But I agree with you, Bruce. He's a guy that he just kind of does, every year there's a wide receiver who falls. I thought Khalil Shakir was that guy last year who just kind of does stuff right and doesn't really have many holes, and just for some reason doesn't get the attention of the draft community the way they should.
I think you could attribute that probably just to fundamentals not being as sexy as like that top end speed or that true, contested catch or flashy catch ability that some of these guys had. When someone is just so sound at what they do, you forget about it because it's commonplace. And that's what Jayden Reed is to me. And when I watched him, even though this guy predominantly lined up out wide, I think you could put him anywhere. And like I said before, and I'll continue to say it, the Bills value versatility. If this man is there on hopefully day 3, I'm doing it. I'm pulling the trigger. I don't think twice about it. I don't care who's there. If they didn't already take a receiver, this is someone I would love to have on this team. I think he'd be a force. And it's stupid of me because it's the one person whose metrics I didn't put down for size. So I'm not going to pretend I know what it is off the top. I don't know if you guys do.
11.
Yeah. Okay. We'll find out.
I think.
Yeah, we'll find out more today too, because this is great timing that I had a show at 11 a.m. that is 2 hours before the combine starts for receivers. I think it's at 1 o'clock for them, so we'll know the true metrics later. I want to talk about one more here, just because I actually watched. He was someone I liked, and I saw the love for him when people went down to Mobile, but I actually watched the interview he did with Eric from Cover One here. Michael Wilson, 6'2", 209 pounds. Not the most stellar year numbers wise, but I really like what this kid brings to the table as well as someone who could be that deep target. If you wanted someone who could probably be more of a separator, and just seems like he has a good head on his shoulders, just as far as how he evaluates and how he game plans. He seems like a McDermott guy through and through. Do you guys feel the same way about him? What's your take on Wilson?
Wilson's a player who is a what if player for me. He's a what if player. What if he would have been in a different situation? What if the health would have been better? What if, things would have been different at Stanford? And I think that there's an opportunity for a team to get value here. We talk a lot about value in free agency, right? We talk about getting value in free agency by picking up people who you're buying low on, essentially. Again, the whole draft is actually economics thing. Football is actually economics, right? All the same rules apply. Buy low, sell high, all that stuff like that. So we talk about free agents buying low for players who are coming off an injury, right? Players who were put behind really good players, right? Players who were backups to really good players and never got a chance to shine, right? You have a chance, you have an opportunity to buy low. Michael Wilson is the buy low receiver, because I don't think anyone is thinking of Michael Wilson as a day two guy, like at all. I think there's an opportunity that you get Michael Wilson low for a very reasonable reason. I just went off on a huge tangent about why it is that you have people not loving Jayden Reed, right? Why do you not love Jayden Reed, right? Well, I know why Michael Wilson's going to go day three. Like, I know why that is. And I'm okay with that. And if you are a team who takes 2 receivers in this draft, I would very much like Michael Wilson to be the second one. Like, if you drafted a receiver in the second round and drafted a receiver in the 4th or 5th, then if Michael Wilson is that second guy, I think you're very, very, very happy with that as a team. I don't think you ever want to come out of this draft and go, okay, hey, we're good. We drafted Michael Wilson at the end of the 4th. I feel good about receiver moving forward. I don't think you draft him with the idea that he is 100% going to fill a hole, because he might, but you're taking a swing on upside with Michael Wilson because of the situation. You're taking a swing because of the situation surrounding that lack of production. So I think that the Senior Bowl was really, really helpful for him. I think if you are a player, if you're a big Michael Wilson guy, like if you're hey, he's my guy, you're thinking he's Terry McLaurin. You're thinking he's a player who just didn't really have the situation line up for him the way you wanted him to. He ends up going later than you think he should, and he ends up being a star. That's what you think he might end up being. But I don't think you take him with the idea that he's going to be. You take him with the idea that he might be, and that's okay based on the risk factor associated with the pick in which you took him.
And I like that they used them as, on screens, because I felt so bad when they tried to use Stephon Diggs on screens last year, and he just kept getting absolutely walloped every time they threw it. And he's a guy that he has experience that in college, so I think that could be a unique part of the offense, because it seems like we haven't been able to get any kind of screen going for the last 2 years. The last successful screen I feel like the Bills threw was that John Brown tunnel screen against Jets opening day 2 years ago. Like, I would love to have some sort of, it's a fun part of the offense, a guy that you could very specifically use in that role as, he develops other skills and, stays healthy and, fun guy. I think wide receiver is one of those spots where I don't think I'll ever be upset, grabbing a guy like Michael Wilson late. Part of me still thinks Marquez Stevenson can come around and
oh, the brand is so strong.
One day.
So I love, and it's easy to love, it's so easy. Wide receiver is such a fun discussion to have, because it's so like we've been saying, there's so many different types of wide receivers. You can put so many different wide receivers on the field at one time, and they're always just fun to watch. So, I'll never be upset with a Michael Wilson-esque day 3 pick.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like, again, when you're getting that late in the draft, especially for a team as rich as the Bills, that's all luxury picks. You're taking it with the hope that they can pan out to be something serviceable. They don't need to be your guy if you're valuing them that late. If they do, that's just more added value to a place where the value isn't expected to be insanely high, more of a low risk, high reward type of place. So with Michael Wilson or Charlie Jones, and I'll keep this brief because I know where we got to wrap up soon, but I'm glad it was mentioned. Charlie Jones, to me, they were lining him up primarily wide, which I didn't really get because when I watched him, I felt like he was much better east to west than he was up and down. He's that kind of guy that can find open field in the middle. And yeah, he was getting like a lot of the catches I saw where he looked like he could run after, where he looked like he was his most productive, wasn't when he was asked to be one-on-one with the corner. So for me, just to answer that comment, I like Charlie Jones. If they were to take him, I could absolutely see him being a pure slot guy on this team. But I think there are better options for them in the later rounds. So on that note, gentlemen, I want to wrap it up. Bruce, do we have time to hear your impression? Or is it kind of too close?
No, absolutely.
Wait, all right. Can I ask you a question about the fish sandwich thing first?
Sure, yeah.
So I have a question. And first of all, I love the date idea. I say this as someone who, me and my fiance today, after I get off this, we're driving about 30 minutes down the road to New Haven, getting some pizza and walking through IKEA. That's our date today.
Ooh.
So I absolutely love that date idea. But so you listed the fish sandwich. Did you eat an entire half of a fish sandwich? Did you just take a bite? Because that's a lot of fish sandwiches.
No, a couple bites of each one. And then if we really liked it, obviously we would do as much as we can to make it. But I had 2 bites of the Filet-O-Fish and she had 2 bites of the Filet-O-Fish because it was bad enough that we didn't really want to continue.
No thank you bites.
Yes, no thank you. So for those who are watching who didn't know, I actually posted a tweet on my timeline yesterday where my wife and I went and we decided we were going to sample 6 fast food sandwiches so that we could rank them all without distorting our opinions, because time really distorts your opinion. Like really, time really messes with it. Like it really helps if you have it, then have a palate cleanser with some water and then have it a different again. Like just do it right then. Don't wait for time to distort your opinion. So we did it, and the list was as follows. Number 1 was Arby's. Number 2 was Wendy's. Number 3 was Popeyes. Number 4 was Dairy Queen. Number 5 is Burger King. Number 6 was McDonald's, as far as the fish sandwiches go. And the impression that they wanted to hear was I really felt like Leon Phelps. I felt like the ladies' man. You know, I felt like I was on the radio and going, yeah, my name's Leon Phelps. I'm the ladies' man. Yeah. Oh, we got a lady. Because he always used to say, yeah, can I buy you a fish sandwich or something? Because you fine. And he was obviously talking to his radio callers who were lady, where he has all the answers for your romantic queries. Right. And that was hands down one of my favorite Saturday Night Live characters of all time was Leon Phelps. So yesterday we were pulling up to the drive-thru. I turned to my wife and I said, yeah, baby, can I buy you a fish sandwich or something? Because you fine. So that was a good line.
You did the impression, and I actually, when you brought it up earlier, I didn't know it by name. After hearing it, now I recognize it.
Yeah, I recognize it now too.
Yeah, because again, we were talking prior to actually going live about this, and I didn't know it by name. He was asking, oh my God, that was great. I'm glad. I also, when I read the tweet too, I was actually, I don't eat Arby's, but I'm kind of like, I feel bad for Arby's. I feel like they get bullied by the fast food community, but a lot of people who have had it and are regulars there kind of say they like it and it's consistent.
It's cult following.
Yeah, it's like Grateful Dead fans or something like that. Like they just
That's fantastic. We're all going to get in a bus and drive around. It's going to have Arby's logos. It's going to say, we have the eats on the side of it. They're going to take the M and cross it off. We're going to be driving across country. I feel like a reality show is coming on for this idea.
Maybe Arby's is certainly something that I could see being like a cult following, maybe having regulars. So on that note, gentlemen, I want to wrap it up today. This was so much fun. Talk about the receivers. You guys were awesome. If you have anything you want to plug, feel free to do it now.
I'll let Bruce go first.
I mean, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. My show, The Bruce Exclusive, drops every Thursday on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network. And thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate it. It is an honor to be a part of it. I know you guys are very new, and it's a lot of fun to be part of something at the very beginning. so that someday we can look back and go, hey, remember that second episode? You had Bruce Nolan. So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of it.
Happy to have you, man.
Bruce is one of the OGs in the creator community. I remember when I had my old show, I had asked him like 6 months before to be on the show, and he reached back out to me 6 months, coming through on his promise. So Bruce, one of the OGs, one of the more unique shows you'll find out there in the creator space. His musical episodes he does every year, or he does sometimes, are really quality content. And then for me, I'm over at Cover One. I'm working on a free agent profile series, just doing some writing. I drop 1 or 2 articles a week, and just find cover1.com or at Sports Rock 2 or at the Cover One tag, anywhere. But just doing some writing.
Awesome, gentlemen. Well, that's going to conclude today's episode. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will be back next weekend with a new topic. Until then, take care. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you soon.